Hi, everyone. Welcome to part four of our four-part series on a great cloud of witnesses, ancestral traditions from around the world. I'm the Reverend Josh Hostler, the rector of Good Shepherd Episcopal Church in Federal Way, and I want to turn the proceedings over to the wonderful member of our Faith Formation Committee who has organized this series, Darren Anderson. Hello, Darren.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to see you here tonight for another evening of learning about other traditions and other cultures as we approach All Saints and All Souls. All Saints is on Sunday. So, I don't know. I'm feeling kind of excited about it after having talked about this stuff for 4 weeks in a row. But tonight I want to introduce to you Imam Jamal Rahman. He is the co-founder and imam of Interfaith Community Sanctuary in Seattle, which is a place where people from all different faiths come together to learn and pray and study and rely on each other for a sense of community. He's also adjunct faculty at Seattle University, and he's a member of Interfaith Amigos. I'm going to urge one of you guys to ask him later about what Interfaith Amigos means. Also, he's authored and co-authored 7 books on Islam, interfaith relations, and spirituality. So I'd like you to give a silent show of your applauding hands to welcome him to talk to us tonight.
Thank you so much, my dear friends. And I want to immediately ask if my sound volume is audible. You can hear me clearly? Okay, terrific, excellent. So since it's a topic on Islam, I will start with a Quranic recitation. And the word Quran literally means recitation. It's a sonoral revelation. It's meant to be heard. And the power of the Quran is not so much in the translation. It really is in the vibrations of the sound. They say the sound reaches the mind and the heart before the words reach. And that is what has an impact. So here's a recitation of the first chapter of the Quran, which is the equivalent of the Lord's Prayer. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Malik Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. So basically in this prayer, the first chapter of the Quran, humanity is begging God, oh God, you're the all-compassionate, all-aware. Please guide all of humanity on what is called the straight path, straight to God. So, my friends, I've broken up my disorganized talk. I have purposely have it scattered so we can get snippets here and there. I'd first like to start by just saying a few words about Islam, a very misunderstood religion. It's a 7th century religion, 7 centuries after birth of Christ. There are a lot of Muslims all over the world. By the last count, they said 1.9 billion. And the statistics, Pew Research says that in 20, 30 years, it'll be the largest religion in the world. So it's good to know something about the other. Like for me as a Muslim living in America, it is my sacred duty to have an appreciative understanding of Christianity, for example, and other traditions for the sake of my neighbors and connecting with the other. So 7th century religion, Islam means to surrender to God. And there are 2 main denominations. Like in Christianity, you have Catholics and Protestants. We have Shia and Sunni. 85% of Muslims are Sunni, 15% are Shia. And what is the difference between them? Very little, but as always happens, historical disputes in this case can cause huge problems. So the dispute started when the Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE. Then the question arose, who would succeed him? Not as a prophet, but as a community leader. And one group said it should be by consensus. The other group said, of course, that's a beautiful idea, but don't forget, we had a prophet in our midst. It should be by blood lineage. The ones who said blood lineage, they are called Shia. The ones who said should be by consensus, they are Sunnis. Today, it doesn't matter because there are many, many Muslim majority countries, close to 60 majority Muslim countries. But in those days, they needed a central leader. But that historical dispute has caused so much of pain, and there have been killings and this and that. So that's the story of the denominations. I want you to know that the followers of Islam are called Muslims or Muslims. I also want you to know that for 1,000 years, Islam was, just like Christianity is today, a privileged religion. What do I mean by that? For example, the academicians will say, if in the 1,000 years since 6th century, if you asked who had the largest geographical empire, it was the Islamic empire. The largest economic power for 1,000 years, it was the Islamic empire. The largest military machine, you know, what Muslims like to believe, a beautiful flowering of arts and sciences, architectural, mystical sciences. But today, if you ask, in which part of the world are people the poorest of the poor, the most illiterate of the illiterate, largest number of war refugees? It is the Islamic world. So the question is, what happened? And most people agree that the answer lies in the way I described to you. Islam was for 1,000 years in all these different areas, number one, number one, number one, number one. You see, this idea of number one creates arrogance and ignorance in the leaders. And over time, they are close to receiving information, knowledge, to make creative changes. And they slowly begin to decline, which is why I love this wonderful insight. We learn from history that we do not learn from history. Okay, having said that, the topic is about ancestors, about the mystery of life and death, the afterlife. So I'm going to just take you through a template in Islam and just take out some snippets about death and dying from those particular points. For example, if you've ever studied Buddhism, Buddhism has 4 noble truths and the 8-fold path. Islam has 3 principles and 5 pillars. The first one, the first principle of Islam is surrender, which I said is the meaning of Islam. You're surrendering to God. But the question is, what are you surrendering? And the Quran is saying, you're surrendering your attachment to your ego. By the way, as I'm speaking now, I'll be speaking about very beautiful things about Islam. So please don't get the impression that all the Muslims are beautifully following that. They're not. But I'm not saying that non-Muslims are following that. But this is the spiritual core of Islam. That surrender means I spend a lifetime trying to bring divinity and not ego as a center of my life. So the Quran makes several reminders. Before you die, the Quran says, can you be mindful of this particular core work that we all have to do? Which is why before Prophet Muhammad died, as he was dying, he would always ask, even as he was not able to stand, he would say, is there someone I owe money to? Have I ever hurt anybody? Please tell me. And he would say it again and again. And even when could not even speak, he would say, please tell me, it is for my sake. They said, you're a prophet. Why are you saying these things? And he said, his famous words were, it is better to blush in this world than in the next world. It is better to blush in this world than in the next world. So that is a very important statement for people my age. In the last quarter of my life, can I take care of things? And this suggests that when I move on to the next world in the afterlife, the work of becoming a better human being, it continues. And I'll talk more about that. Okay, so that was surrender. The second principle in Islam is iman, having faith. And in Islam, you must have faith in 5 things. The first one is God. Second one is angels. Third one is all the prophets. Fourth one is all the holy books. And the fifth one is Judgment Day. Here, I just wanted to tell you that the Quran talks about the fact that, as we all know, death is inevitable. And the angel of death is called Azrael or Israel, who will one day come to me, and I might not be conscious of it, and say, I've come to take your soul back to God. And so that is why the Rumi, for example, says, please know, and this is a quotation from the Quran, everyone will have a taste of death. And Rumi adds to that, yes, but only few of us will really have a taste of life because we don't know how to live. So that's something that we're all asked to take to heart, that all of us will have a taste of death. The angel will come, but only few will have a taste of life. Okay, let me move on to the third principle. That's called ihsan, meaning we have to do the work while we are on planet Earth to become more Christ-like, Buddha-like, Elohim-like, Krishna-like. This is critical work. And what is the work? The work is really, if I break it down from the Quran, while I'm alive, can I transform my ego? Can I transform it from what is called a commanding master into a personal assistant? A lot of work. Can I, and this is mentioned 132 times, the heart, can I open my heart? So you have a lot of poetry in Islam, like there's a wonderful poetry that says, Jamal, please open the window of your heart. Open the window of your heart. The moon will kiss you only through the window. The radiance of the moon, it illuminates the east and the west, but of what use is it if the window of your heart is closed? So the Quran is emphasizing again and again, and of course I'm not listening, Muslims are not listening, that this inner inconvenient work while you're alive, you simply have to do it. This is why this is one half of your work here. The other half is to be of service. But the one half is to become what is called a more complete, developed human being. So there's poetry about a person who says, I'm so tired of life. I just want to die and go off to the other realm. I'm ready. I want to die. I'm sick and tired of this world. So that poet asks, but if you don't do your inner work here, do you think ghosts will do it for you there? Do you think if you don't break your ropes here, that ghosts, what you call it, ghosts will break your ropes in the other world? So again, indicating that the Quran is suggesting in the afterlife, there's a lot of inner work we have to keep on doing. So in Islam, there is no reincarnation like Hindus and Buddhists talk about, but the reincarnation happens in those mysterious realms. Okay, so I hope I'm clear about those three principles. And I've just taken a few snippets.
And
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry,
John.
surrender and faith, and the third was work.
It's called ihsan, which means make yourself more beautiful. It comes from hasana, to make yourself beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, and you have to do it as best as you can, which is why, you know, Rumi has this poetry who says, you know, death is hoarse from shouting. Death is hoarse, has become hoarse from shouting, from so many astounding blows. Death's drum skin has split. And you have remained unmindful. Only now do you apprehend the mystery of death. But Jamal, you enmeshed yourself in trivialities. So to become aware of this great need, you see, there's a wonderful, it's called Hadith Qudsi, a revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad in a dream, which spiritual Muslims like to meditate on. And that revelation is, God says to each one of us, beloved one, God says, I was a secret treasure and I longed to be known. And so I created you and the worlds visible and invisible. This is something which Sufis love. I was a secret treasure, God says, and I longed to be known. And so I created you and the worlds visible and invisible. By the way, I should explain to you who are the Sufis. Sufism is not a denomination like many people think, like Sunni, Shia. People will tell me, Jamal, you're a nice guy, but that's because you're not really a Muslim, you're a Sufi, you know. But Sufism is not a denomination. Sufism is a heartfelt aspiration to live the spirit of the tradition without getting bogged down by theology and the rituals have to be this way or that way. They just focused on living the spirit of the tradition. So I'll give you an example. So a conservative Muslim might say, Jamal, you have 5 obligatory prayers. A Muslim has 5 obligatory prayers in the course of the day. And Jamal, if you don't do your prayers, you will burn in hell with the fires raging and the scalding waters coming down and all kinds of punishment. A Sufi, who also will encourage me to do my 5 obligatory prayers, will have a different angle on the explanation. A Sufi will say, Jamal, when you pray, it is as if you are attending a celestial banquet. And if you don't pray, you're missing out on the feast. And that is your punishment. So a different approach. So Rumi, for example, he is a Sunni, but he's called a Sufi because he has a heartfelt aspiration. Have any of you heard of this poet, 14th century, named Hafiz or Hafiz? You have, okay. So that's not his real name. He's a very famous poet, very rebellious, very well known all over the world, 14th century. Hafiz is just someone who has memorized the Quran. So that's the title given to him. Okay, anyway, to get on to the topic, our topic at hand. So I mentioned 3 principles, now 5 pillars. The first pillar is called the Shahada, which has 2 parts. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. The first part is, there is no God but God. And God is a complete mystery. The God who gives us life, who gives us death, total mystery. That's why in trying to understand God, Rumi says, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. That's right. It's hard to, ask so many questions because we don't know. Just be in the question. But I can explain to you through some Quranic verses. One Quranic verse says, if all the trees in this universe became pens and all the 7 oceans became ink, the Quran says, and you began to write out the mysteries of God and those oceans were depleted and you filled them up, you wouldn't come close to describing a fraction of the fraction of the fraction of God's mysteries. So I'm talking about death. You know, here we are living. We have no idea where we have come from. We have no idea what we are doing here. And really, we have no idea what really happens when we go. But we have some inklings from our holy books. Another verse in the Quran says, we are closer to you than your jugular vein. We are closer to you than your jugular vein. And the Quran says, I am outside of you, Zahir, and I am Batin, inside of you. I am inside of you. Where? That's a big question for Sufis. So Prophet Muhammad had a dream, and God said, tell this to humanity. God says, beloved one, God says, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart of my devotee. So for Sufis, this is a very incredible space. The space here actually is infinite. God is outside of me, and God is right here inside of me, inside of me. And I mention all of this because this is what the Quran says our journey is. Life and death. It's a journey from God on planet Earth. We arrive here. It's a journey back to God, and it's a journey in God. Meaning we continue becoming reincarnated. The Quran has a verse that says, when you die, you come to the other side, you will assume forms you have absolutely no idea about. Then it says, but beyond that, it is kept hidden from you. Which is why Rumi says, why should I be afraid of death? Why? When was I ever lesser by dying? You know, I died as a mineral, I became a plant. As dying as a plant, I became an animal. Dying as an animal, I became a human being. When I die as a human being, I shall become an angel. Dying as an angel, I shall assume even higher forms. The whole idea is in Islam, Islamic spirituality, we are being reincarnated in higher forms, eventually becoming one with God. By the way, whatever that means, I don't know. Okay, so the other part of the Shahada, the first pillar is the most important. I said, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And by the way, just for theology, the most misunderstood word or verse is Muhammad is the messenger of God, because most non-Muslims think that the Quran is saying that Muhammad is the only messenger or prophet of God, or that he is the greatest prophet of God. Not true at all. There are several Quranic verses that tell Muhammad, there were many prophets who came before you. Many. There's nothing revealed to you that was not revealed to them. So make no distinction between the prophets. So if a Muslim says, Muhammad is the greatest prophet, this is very un-Islamic actually, very un-Quranic. So in the Quran, Abraham is called the friend of God. Moses is called the one through whom God spoke. And by the way, the prophet most mentioned in the Quran is Moses. Jesus, and peace be upon all of them, he's called the Spirit of God, Ruh Allah, the Spirit of God. And there's a whole chapter in the Quran on Mary, who is called the holiest of the holy among women. In fact, there's more about Mary in the Quran than all the Christian scriptures put together, actually. And so Maryam is what Mary is called. And there are many, many Muslim women who are called Maryam. There are many Muslim men who are called Jesus, but they're called Isa, or Musa, meaning Moses, or Ibrahim, Abraham. Okay, so about Muhammad, I just want to say one thing, which relates to a topic of death. He has several incredible, phenomenal spiritual mysteries happen to him. But one phenomena was, he was not quite sure what was happening. He was meditating, and then he found himself being transported from Mecca to Medina. Sorry, excuse me, to Jerusalem, forgive me. From Mecca to Jerusalem, where the Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem. And from there, he began to ascend 7 levels of heaven, from which comes this term, among other explanations, I am in 7th heaven, 7 levels of heaven. And he came as close as possible to God. So the thinking is, among Muslim spiritual teachers, when you die and you go over to the other side, and a lot of things happen, we don't even know exactly what happens, the journey continues. And depending on how you did on planet Earth, in terms of becoming more Christ-like, being of service, and being of doing righteous deeds, based on that evaluation, you'll be placed on one of the levels of the 7 levels, and the journey continues to God. Okay, so that's the first pillar, the most important one. The second pillar is prayer. I don't know if you've seen Muslims pray. They go like this, and everything has a deep symbolic meaning. When a Muslim stands in the presence of God and goes like this, it means, oh God, for now, I am putting the world behind me, and I'm touching my ears. I'm really listening. And he bows and prostrates on the floor. You know, there's a very famous saying, one prostration of prayer to God liberates you from 1,000 prostrations to your ego. That's why it's wonderful to bow and prostrate. So the reason I mentioned prayer is people always want to know what is the best way to connect with the deceased. And the Islamic spiritual literature suggests one good way is to pray for the deceased as often as you can, and that creates a channel, a very powerful connective channel between you and the one who is deceased. So in my own life, for example, whenever I pray, I'm always praying for my father and mother, praying for my parents. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that you can feel a sense of connection, which is every tradition, I'm sure, but Muslims really emphasize pray for the deceased loved ones, and you will feel palpably that connection, which is why the Prophet Muhammad, one of his most favorite exercises was to go to grave sites and just pray at the grave site, of his loved ones. All his children died, his wives died. He had many, many deaths in his lifetime. And the other reason is that the Prophet Muhammad said, you connect best with the deceased who is in those mysterious realms, particularly if you pray from their gravesite. The connection is somehow stronger. Okay, so that was prayer. The third pillar was service, being of service, tithing, being of service. And the Prophet Muhammad said, this is another way to connect with your deceased loved ones, by doing a righteous deed, but dedicating it in their name. So for example, as a Muslim, Friday is a very holy day. So every Friday, I do something nice, something which can be called a righteous deed. Can be very small, can be medium, depending on my circumstances, but I dedicate that to my parents. I had a very close relationship with my parents, and that dedication of a righteous deed brings you closer to your loved one. Also, the Prophet Muhammad said, if you really want to connect with the deceased, build something that endures and helps people, and do it in their name. So I just an example, because I work with the interfaith group. So from here, I and my siblings, we have established a school for women in my ancestral village in the name of my parents, believing that my connection with my deceased parents continues. Just recently, in 2014, we built, because my sister is a medical doctor, we built a clinic, a free clinic for women and children, again in my ancestral village, and we called it Suraya Ataur Medical Clinic. That's the name of my parents. Suraya, my mother, Ataur, my father. And because we believe that this keeps that connection with the loved one. And this is on advice of the Prophet. So the next one, the fourth pillar, is Ramadan. Are you familiar with Ramadan? It's becoming more known now. Muslims in the month of Ramadan, they fast. But just for your information, Ramadan has two meanings. Ramadan means the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. That particular month is called Ramadan. Ramadan also means the spiritual practice of fasting, purifying yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You're fasting not only from food and drink and sexual intimacy in that period from sunrise to sunset, you're also fasting from anger, greed, practicing self-restraint. But a good question to ask is, so why do Muslims do the practice of fasting in the month of Ramadan? Because in the month of Ramadan, the Prophet Muhammad experienced a phenomenal spiritual event that changed the course, Muslims believe, of history. It's called the Night of Power. In the month of Ramadan, we don't know exactly which day of the month, the Prophet was meditating in the cave. He used to have retreats for 40 days and nights in the caves of Mecca every year. And as he was meditating one night, he had this extraordinary experience of Angel Gabriel approaching him. He got so scared, but to cut a long story short, Angel Gabriel began to transmit messages, Muslims believe, from God to Angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. It started in the month of Ramadan in the year 610 CE. So for Muslims, when they're so touched, they feel so grateful that in the month of Ramadan, the first verses of the Quran descended to humanity to Prophet Muhammad. They express gratitude by making a commitment to purify themselves in that particular month. So in that particular month, how does it relate to the deceased? If we pray for the loved ones or people who have passed on, they say they get greater merit in the month of Ramadan. Okay, last one is called Hajj, which is pilgrimage, but it's really about community. And if someone dies, whether it's in a remote place, the person is a stranger, it's an Islamic tradition that the community will really rally around and help the person who is dead in terms of washing the body, which is an essential prerequisite, wrapping the body in a shroud, white shroud, and then burying it. The whole community gets involved. Okay, so I'll stop there as far as the 5 pillars are concerned. And just to remind you, the 5 pillars are, the first one is called the profession of faith, has 2 parts. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. That's the first pillar. Second pillar is prayer. Third pillar is service. Fourth pillar is Ramadan. And the 5th pillar is Hajj, H-A-J-J, pilgrimage, but the spiritual meaning of it is creating community. Muslims from all over the world, in the 12th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, they gather in Mecca to make this 6-7 days pilgrimage. Okay, so having said that, and I'm watching my time, tell you just a few things about what do Muslims believe when someone dies. First of all, the Quran is very clear that you have no idea of the joy the soul feels in returning home. The Quran says, "O serene soul, return to your Lord, pleased and pleasing in God's sight, and join my servants and enter my paradise." So Islamic mystics have lots of poetry on the joy the soul feels. And every death is considered a good happening. So here's a verse from Rumi that I can remember. They say about every death, in eulogies they will say it, how marvelous was the way. So when I die, somebody will say, how marvelous was the way, Jamal, you quit the world. How marvelous was the way you quit the world, the way you ruffled your feathers, the way you ruffled your feathers, and breaking free of your cage, you took off for your soul's world. A love-sick nightingale among owls, a love-sick nightingale among owls, you caught the scent of roses and flew to the rose garden. That's a very popular verse. A love-sick nightingale among owls, you caught the scent of roses and you flew to the rose garden. But the Quran reminds us that, Jamal, you think that death happens at the end of your life. No, death happens every single night. Like in the Jewish tradition, Muslims believe that when they sleep, it is death. You actually die, and your soul rises and goes to God and prostrates to God, and God receives, metaphorically, in God's bosom and keeps the soul there. In the morning, returns the soul back to the human body. And the Quran says, for a term appointed. But there will come a time when the soul goes to God, but does not come back. And that actually is death. Okay, so someone dies, what happens? How much do we know from the Quran or from the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad? Islamic literature says when a person dies, it goes to a place called barzakh. And you don't have to worry about that. Barzakh just means a place of deep quietness, quietude, very tranquil, peaceful, totally at rest. And then there comes a time when the whole world collapses, Judgment Day. And the Quran is very vivid, the stars get scattered, graves are overturned. There's this convulsion, and that is Judgment Day. inevitable, says the Quran. Then what happens? Then all those bodies in the grave, they come back to life. And they appear before God and the angels. And then your body, the Quran says, begins to testify. Like Rumi has wonderful verses. He says, like, my mouth will say, without me saying it, my mouth will speak and say, I spoke meanness. My feet will say, I went to places I should not have gone to. And Rumi says, and my genitals will say, me too. And my body starts to speak and testify. And then based on that, and the Quran says God is absolutely incredibly fair. You do one good deed, God will multiply that 10 times. You do one bad deed, it'll just be equivalent to just one same equivalent punishment. But from there, you go to heaven and hell. And of course, in the Quran, they're described in very vivid terms. In the heaven is in very sensual terms, it's filled with foliage, running streams, birds chirping. For men, you have beautiful virgins running around. For women, you have the youths there. Very alluring, very enticing. And as far as hell is concerned, it's a terrible place. You don't want to be there. Raging fire, scalding water, etc., etc. But now the question is that literal or metaphorical? We don't know. But a lot of, I would say a large number of Muslims believe it is definitely metaphorical because, for example, all the descriptions of heaven is exactly what would be most alluring for the 7th century Arabian men. In that arid desert, you have green foliage, flowing stream, birds chirping, flowers everywhere. And the description, for example, of women is exactly what the men, Arabian men of the 7th century loved. Very white-skinned, lustrous eyes, black hair, what the Arab men really desired. So a lot of Muslims say, it's just an enticement, particularly for the pagans. They were called pagans at that time in the 7th century, not because of their beliefs, but because that particular group of pagans believed that there was no afterlife. And this was the only life you had. And so therefore you can just do whatever it is you want to do. And it's a tale of the ancients about the fact that you're accountable. And that is why, hell is a place where it's a difficult place. But there are a lot of wonderful stories. For example, the Sufi story of the mullah, the fictional mullah. His wife wanted some fire because she had some firewood and they had a big party going on and she didn't know how to light it. They had to rub the sticks to catch the fire. So she told the mullah, go to hell and ask the angel in charge there and bring back some fire. So the mullah goes to hell and asks the guardian of the hell, please give me some fire. And the guardian angel says, what fire? Fire from hell. It's raging fire. So there's no fire here. What do you mean there's no fire here? And the angel says, no, you don't understand. It's not physical fire. The fire is the fire of anger, hatred, bitterness inside of people that they bring when they come here. That is the fire. That is hell. There's the wonderful, the most beloved female saint in Islam named Rabia. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, 8th, 9th century. And she was a very popular sage, and she would be very eager to convey this message that why is it that people live a life based on being good because of fear of hell or because of the allure of the pleasures of heaven? So she would be seen walking in the streets. It's a real story, with a torch of fire and a pail of water. And they would say, Rabia, and she's very famous, where are you going? She said, with my torch of fire, I'm going to set fire to all the sensual pleasures of heaven. Even a pail of water, I'm going to put out all the fires of hell. Is this a way to live? Fear of hell and a greed for the pleasures of heaven? No, do it for the sake of God. Okay, that's as much as I want to say about that. I'll just have two more points I've written down here. One is, a real life story about my mother. I mean, just to give an idea what happened, what happens when someone dies. In 1991, my mother came to visit me from Bangladesh. And sadly, the same night, she fell very, very ill. So I rushed her to hospital. It was in Bellevue. Then she had to be helicoptered all the way to Harborview. But the point of this is that in 7 days, she died unexpectedly. It was a huge shock. And I'm very close to my mother and father. And my father, who was still in Bangladesh, he was so shocked. In 20 days, he died of a heart attack. Well, I would say he died of a broken heart. So the first point was, of course, everybody thought I should send my mother's body back to Bangladesh. That's the custom, to be buried in our own country. But like the Jewish tradition, in Islam, the body has to be buried in 24 hours. The body is amazingly a source of great respect in Islam. You cannot harm the body. So my mother is buried here, and my father is buried there. So when a Muslim dies, as my mother died in Harborview Hospital, the moment the person dies, you turn the person's face in the direction of Mecca. That's where the holy city of Islam is. And then you actually never leave the body, meaning it's very rare, like you take a body to a funeral home and you let it lie there all night long. But this is, we had to take her to the funeral home, and the burial was the next day, and she had to stay there alone in the funeral house. This is unthinkable actually in Islamic culture, because the body always has to be surrounded by loved ones. People are coming and seeing the body, paying the respects, and you don't leave the body alone. And this is something which I really, I respect a lot about Muslims. Of course, I'm a Muslim, but if I'm being subjective, people will not care about the other person. But if a human body dies, the body is really respected. You handle it with the utmost care. The washing, the body has to be washed very delicately with great tenderness. It is wrapped with great tenderness. I'm from Bangladesh. Terrible traffic we have there. But if there's a particular horn, if it sounds, meaning it is carrying a dead body, it's like Red Sea parting. I don't know how they do it, but the road immediately opens up because it has to give way to the dead body. Okay, so the body has to be washed. It has to be wrapped in white cloth, signifying purity. And we don't have cremation, although it's changing now. It has to touch the earth. So we don't have coffins. We discourage coffins. The body has to touch the earth, and it has to be in connection with the earth. And the reason why cremation is not allowed is because in the 7th century there was a lot of savage battles, and in the savage battles, the enemy would mutilate the body of the enemy, would cut up and mutilate it. And so that was considered very non-sacred, and you must keep the body sacred. And a burial, a death, is celebrated in different ways, depending on the culture. I'm from South Asia, so people are just in mourning for 40 days. They choose the number 40, and after 40 days, there's another prayer for the soul of the one who has passed away. And that death is always called it's a wedding with the beloved, the person who has died. So I just wanted to introduce one more thing here. I get a lot of people in my work who want to connect with the dead. Not just Muslims, a lot of Christians, Jews, mostly Christians. They say, like they say, please, someone has passed away, and I haven't had closure. I want to connect. What does your religion say about connecting? Can you make me connect to that person who has died? There's so many things I wanted to say. Please forgive me, or I love you, and I was not able to do that. So they come to me because in the Islamic tradition, as I said, you can connect through prayers. Muslims believe that once that soul has gone to the barzakh, that place of quietude, they will not come to you except in a vision. That's called kashf in the Quran. So if I'm in a trance, meaning if I'm very relaxed, I can get a vision of the one who has passed away. Or if I'm dreaming, my loved one will come to me, the one who has passed away, in the vision. So in Sufi spiritual practices, there's a process called expression resolution, which I've done hundreds of times, where the person who wants to connect, I will relax them. I'll put them in a place of deep stillness, corresponding in the human way to the barzakh, state of quietude. And I will take them into a very quiet place, what is called sacred sanctuary. And there I say that, the Islamic belief is you can summon the person who has passed away. And the person comes to you, but don't forget that person's soul is always the one that is coming. And souls love the truth. That's another famous saying, souls love the truth. So what is it now you want to say to the soul of this person? And whatever you say is perfect. Perfect, because souls love the truth. It doesn't matter what it is. Hate, anger, if you have hate against that person, express it. This is healing for you and for that soul. Why? Because it is the truth. Souls love the truth. And only consequences are that of healing and beauty and a deep connection. So you express in that still state whatever it is you want to express. Usually a lot of tears and a lot of expression, whether it's anger or something that needs to be said. And then the next step is just make a sacred prayer. That's called expression. And the second part is called resolution, where you just, in your quiet state, you look at that person's soul, or you feel that person's soul, and just acknowledge that this person has been in your life as part of a larger, mysterious story. If it was not good, it was terrible, I'm not privy to the larger story. If it was a very good relationship, I am so grateful. Then comes a ritual. If there's some cords that tie you to that person which are unhealthy, you have the permission of that person's soul to cut them. And whatever you release, releases you. You can also establish fresh cords if you want to remain connected, cords rooted in spirit between you and that person. So this sort of a ritual evolves of a connection. And the last part is the person's soul thanks you very, very much and asks your permission to recede into the embrace of spirit, and you give it permission, and the person's soul goes away, and you maintain a beautiful connection, and you have a beautiful closure with the spirit of, or the soul of that deceased person. Okay, my friends, I'm looking at the time, and I would love to hear questions. Any questions?
And I'll jump in and MC as people, if several people raise their hands at once, I'll call on people. KJ, I see your hand.
I was wondering what books you might recommend. I see some books behind you there
Yes.
that we could read that would give us even more insight, besides the Quran, which I plan to read now. But
No, my friend, I would say don't rush out to buy a copy of the Quran. It'd be a big mistake.
oh, okay.
It'd be like trying to read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation without stopping, right?
If you're very familiar with the 7th century events, believe me, it could, I'm sorry to tell you, it could bore you to tears, you know. I would say buy a book which says selections of the Quran. There's one book I recommend called The Light of Dawn by Kamil Helminski, Helminski, Helminski. That's right, Light of Dawn by Helminski. That's a good book to start. Selected verse. You know, Rumi would say the Quran is like a shy bride. Like a shy bride. Don't approach her directly. Approach her through her friends. Who are the friends? All those sages like Rumi, Hafiz, Saadi, Ibn Arabi. You see, all these sages, they went deep into the Quran. You see, I learned the Quran through Rumi.
I love Rumi, and my mom had a Rumi book, oddly, and I don't know why, except I think in college she did date a man from India, and I bet he gave her that book, but she never told me. But that Rumi I've loved since a child. Beautiful poetry.
Yes, you know, if you read Rumi, all of his poetry is about insights, the deeper insights about the Quran.
Sean.
Did you have some other question? I interrupted you as you were talking.
No. Okay. All right. Sean is next, I think. Are you having some trouble unmuting? I don't think I can do that for you. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Yes.
I do have I have so many questions, but one question is there a significance to the prayers, and when you're doing them, I don't know if I would call it singing. Is that how I would say it? Kind of reminds me of monks when they would chant.
Or reciting, yes.
But I noticed that Muslims always, I won't say always, but it always seems like when they're doing their prayers, they're singing them.
Yes, yes. You know, they're reciting them. And in fact, there are different styles of recitation. And just as you have, you know, what do you call it? American Idol or American Got Talent. In the Muslim world, you have this competition between reciters. You know, young people, older people, they compete in the best way to recite the Quran, and they get big prizes as per the most beautiful recitation. So yes, it is recited in a melodious voice, and there are 8 different styles of singing it.
I was wondering what is there a significance to it?
To the singing, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's just they have found that certain styles of singing, it affects the body and the soul in a different way. But basically, it's just a sincerity of the way you sing it that has an effect. So in Islamic healing, you know, an herbal healer will take an herb and then keep reciting Quranic verses, singing into it, and then wrap it up and give it to the patient, as it were. So the power the Muslims believe is in the vibrations of that recited verse.
Mark, I see that you've unmuted. Do you have a question?
I do, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for your energy and your enthusiasm for Islam. It really comes out, and it's most excellent to see. The part about going into this silent mode and then having a spiritual connection with an ancestor or this kind of thing. So I'm trying to understand that better. And so you're establishing a new kind of relationship then in a way. And for me, the only way I can wrap my head around it is like the people that have passed or are dead that are more alive in a way. It's so, or help me understand the relationship somewhat.
Yes. Well, it's really about the power of silence. So much can happen in pure silence. And let me describe to you what silence the mystics say it is. The mystics say silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the absence of the little self, the I, me. Number two, Rumi says, silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation. Silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation. So, when I want to connect with a loved one, I am motivated to go into a kind of silence which somebody else will not be able to because they don't have that motivation. And in that silence, I'm connecting with the silence of that deceased person in the bazark. And in that silence, I begin to get a vision, if I am visual, but in any case, I begin to get a connection with the deceased one. It can also happen through my loud prayers, but because I am saying it with such sincerity and love, is the deepest form of silence. And in that, I connect with the deceased soul. So yes, how it happens, I don't know, Brother Mark, but I must tell you, I can tell you with inner certainty that it is more than theoretical. I have gone into very deep silence because I really wanted to connect. Mm-hmm. And when I was able to do that, I actually felt palpably a connection. And after I felt that connection, I began to see, in this case, it was a mother and father at different times, they began to appear in my dreams. And not only appear in my dreams, you've got to believe this, Mark, they began to solve some serious problems I had.
Oh, okay.
Once I had a tax problem, and usually in my life, when my father, mother were alive, if I had a problem, my father would take care of it, not my mother. He was the person who was able to handle all that. But in my dream, it is my mother who came to me and said, "Don't worry, I've talked to the tax person, and this will happen. It'll get cleared up." And my father was standing there like my mother would stand there lovingly. And just within less than a week, I got a letter from IRS saying it has been cleared. And I didn't do one thing. This is just one example, you see. Okay. That is why I speak with, for me, it's like I had the taste of it.
Okay.
That I can connect.
Okay, great.
Mark.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Christopher, and then Sean, I'm going to come back to you since you've had one before. Is that all right? Okay, Christopher.
Yes, Jamal. In the Bible, it talks about people that are very zealous, the zealots. And I'm asking this just really out of curiosity, but that also exists in many spiritual directions and within Islam, as we understand. What are your thoughts there as to how it's handled within the faith? And then also, where were you on 9/11 and what were your thoughts at that situation?
Yeah. So by zealots, you mean like fanatics, like people who are violent?
Yes, fanatics.
Yeah. Of course, yes. Absolutely, there are extremists in every religion. The danger is that if I begin to judge a religion by the behavior of some people, of some zealots, then every religion is in very, very deep trouble. See, that is a problem. So yes, for example, the recent beheading of that teacher in France by that zealot, that young man, 18 years old. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a terrible act, absolutely, unacceptable. There's nothing in the Quran, believe me, and I've read the Quran upside down, that would justify even an iota of that. But it happens. Just like when I go out and speak, there are some groups that are ready to attack me. I don't know what they're called, the Crusade for Christ or something, And before I can open my mouth, somebody jumps up to defend me. And what I hear is what they say. They say, wasn't the Bible used to justify slavery, justify apartheid? Didn't we have segregation in the South until just recently? Does that mean that Christianity is bad? Not at all. Christianity is a beautiful, loving religion. Similarly, other religions are beautiful, but when you begin to judge them by the actions of some people, it creates a big problem, a big wound, really. Where was I during 9/11? I was actually in Seattle, and people were very supportive, and that was the beginning. It was a terrible situation, but the good side of 9/11 was people began to realize we have to connect with the other. And to connect with the other, we have to get to know something about the other. So I'm going on for a long time, but this is very critical. Like Mahatma Gandhi, he was very familiar with what it takes to create peace in a pluralistic society. And he made 3 points. Number one, he would say it is the sacred duty of every individual to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. He would say, please don't say, I am non-prejudiced, I am not biased. He would say, what are you non-prejudiced about? You must have a basic understanding. So I, as a Muslim, I must have, for me to create peace, a basic understanding of Christianity. And he would say an appreciative understanding. Point one. Point two, Gandhi would say, every religion has truths and untruths. Yes, revelations are divine, but the human mind is less than divine. When the human mind touches a divine verse, the understanding can be less than divine. Third point, he would say, if an extremist, a zealot, commits a crime, something wrong, he would say, I beg you, please do not criticize this person's religion. Rather, point out to this person verses of beauty and wisdom from this person's own tradition. That is the way to peace. But that presupposes that we know something about the other person's religion. But thank you for that wonderful question, Brother Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. I think the way I would see that is that there's really no such thing as religious violence. All religious violence is actually political. Right down at it. It's not about the religion. It's about the politics going on.
Brother Josh, it's a very good point you bring up. The largest study on suicide bombing, Muslim suicide bombing, has been done by the University of Chicago, by a particular professor named Robert Pape. He's been given lots of money by Pentagon. And he's come up with the conclusion that 98% of Islamic suicide bombers is all political. It's not based, they say it's to defend religion, but it's really to throw off the anger against foreign occupation. But they justify it because of the authority of religion. They will say, it is for the sake of Islam.
Thank you.
And by the way, I love the sayings of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who said, do you remember that Russian dissident, Alexander Solzhenitsyn? He died not long ago, very famous writer. He said, if only it was so simple that there's some bad, evil people out there, and all you have to do is separate them, isolate them, and destroy them. He says, alas, the line dividing good and evil runs through every single human heart. And who is willing to tear a piece of his or her own heart?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sean.
Sorry. I do have a question when it comes to the death, the dying, preparing the body.
Mhm.
What happens if the person has committed like the most heinous crime,
Mhm.
and they're in this in their in community? Is the community still going to come together if they've done like the most despicable thing possible? Are they still going to come and treat that body like they would somebody else, or are they kind of like banished? And
Mhm. Yes, very good question, Sean. It's a very controversial question. So, for example, when a terrorist commits a crime, and by the way, in Islamic terrorism, they have mostly killed Muslims. 90% of people they have killed is Muslims. When a terrorist commits a crime, sometimes you're right, they don't want to claim the body. They're so upset, they will not do that, you see. They're furious. But then there are some sage people who will say, that you've got to make a distinction between behavior and being. A person's behavior might be evil, but the person's being, essence, it's Christ nature, Buddha nature, Allah nature, Elohim nature. So based on that, they will say, I'm against a person's behavior, but I'm not against that person's being. And yes, it's terrible, but that person's soul is pure. And based on that, they will bury that body.
Sean has another question.
Please ask. I would love it for you to ask questions.
I have another quick question. So I know it 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 seems like Muslim and Buddhism kind of have something similar, I think, when it comes to treating the body, that there is to be like no damage. Does
Yeah.
that also mean that like if you wanted to find out how somebody died, do you do autopsies?
Good question. Uh, uh, until autopsies are very controversial because of the fact that bodies used to be mutilated in the past, and there's such respect for body. Yes, they discourage autopsies. However, the Quran says that something for the greater good. For the greater good, they do allow autopsies, but families are reluctant unless they have to do autopsies. They feel very uncomfortable to give permission, but it's legal, it's allowed, and it is done in Muslim countries. That's a great question. They are not happy about it.
Before you, Darren, I see that Anita and Bruce have unmuted, and I wonder if that means you have a question.
I there's this word barzakh that I understand has to do with the place for the departed.
Yeah.
Is that for all souls or just certain ones? And then at the judgment, God assigns people to heaven or hell, or did I not understand that correctly?
You mean is the barzakh for Muslims or non-Muslim? Is that what you're asking?
No, is this the place that they believe that, according to Muslim belief, is a place for all souls, whether they're Muslim or they're
Oh yeah, for all of humanity, all of
humanity?
all
Okay.
of humanity. Yes, they all go to barzakh, and Allah in the Quran is described as the God of all of humanity, even though some Muslims will make it sound like he's not or she's not, but no, he's the God of all of humanity. Yeah, so Muslim, non-Muslim, they'll go to barzakh. Muslim, non-Muslim, they'll all face day of judgment,
Yes.
and they'll go to heaven or hell. And that, of course, the interpretation is different, what heaven and hell is. But for it's all of humanity.
I'm quite sure of that. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. Great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Darren?
Okay, my question is about Shia and Sunni
Yes.
getting along together. And I'm imagining that Muslim diaspora, maybe in non-Muslim countries or something, might get along together better. So, or another way, like if I visited a mosque here in Seattle, would I see Muslim and Shia worshiping together?
Yes and no. In some mosques, Shias and Muslims will get together, but then the Shias have also established their own mosques. And they have just different kinds of prayers. I mean, minimal to the point where it's absurd. So for example, a Muslim will go like this, and then it will go up and they'll fold their hands like this. A Sunni will do that. I'm a Sunni. A Shia will go like this and put their hands down like this, but not like this. And that is a source of controversy because we are human beings.
It's a little like do you genuflect before you get into the pew in Christian churches, right? People can get very hung up on these things.
But I should mention one thing which is important. The Shias, when in 632, they believe that the cousin and the son-in-law, he was the cousin and the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, should have become the Caliph, but he was not the first Caliph. And they're really upset about that. And then when he did become Caliph, the fourth Caliph he became, then, by this time, politics had entered the entire situation, and there was a battle between the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad and an opposing Sunni army, in the 7th century. And the opposing Sunni army slaughtered the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad and his entire family. And this has caused a huge lamentation. How could you do that? You slaughtered and killed the grandson and the family of the Prophet? That wound, it persists till today. How could you? How could you? How could you, for the sake of power, for the sake of, a title? And so that is also a wound that continues till today. Sad to say. And by the way, just for you to know, I said 15% are Shia, 85% are Sunnis. So Iran is a majority Shia country. Iraq is a majority Shia country also.
Yeah. Let's see. I saw Mary's hand first, I think.
Oh.
You spoke about the value of doing your inner work.
Yes.
And I know there's distinct value to that here on this planet, on this plane. Do you think is there any value to that in the next plane, or does your soul retain that after you die? Maybe that you come to a peace about something, or
Yeah, from my understanding, Mary, when I die, go over to the other side, I retain the level of purity I had achieved on earth. But then it becomes incumbent on me to continue to purify myself more and more and more to become more godlike. And based on that, I rise into higher levels of heaven, and I assume forms I have no idea about, more than angels even, and eventually I merge with God. So the work of purification continues.
Okay.
And they say it's a very beautiful thing. You will experience and have the capacity to encompass and embrace more joy, more love, more delight, more ecstasy.
Thank you.
I think you get some of that here by doing the work.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, no doubt about it. Not only that, without doing the spiritual practices, it is impossible to solve social justice issues or earth care.
Yeah, that's true
With
too.
social justice issues, I've got to overcome my biases, prejudices.
Yep.
To take care of planet Earth, the biggest environmental problems are not loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse. The biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And I'm quoting a very famous environmentalist scientist.
We're a little over time. It's well worth it. Mark, I saw you had one more question.
Yeah, a quick one, because it's probably maybe a complex question. But you mentioned Iran and Iraq, and both Muslim countries, and in our time they had a pretty nasty war there going on. So was there, I mean, what an awful thing, and war is crappy no matter where it is. But what's the religious ramifications of that? Anything learned, or was it, like you said before, it's greed or power or this kind of thing, and it's not really religion, although that's a couple of Muslim countries, it had nothing to do with it. I don't really know, and maybe there's no answer, but
No, I mean, war is never the solution, in my understanding, you see. It has so many ramifications that are negative. It never is in my opinion, a solution. Of course, you might say then you had to do war to overcome Hitler. True, that is true. But bloodshed begets bloodshed, and there's no end to that. No end to that. I mean, I've met people who have served in Iraq, nurses particularly, who have begun to stutter. They never had stuttered before. They said they have seen so much blood, and that it has done something to their soul, it's damaged them. And she says, people have no idea, absolutely no idea, unless you serve and you are in the battlefield, of the damage it does, not to their body only, to the soul. And so really, if I would say, if any way we can avoid bloodshed, it's very celestial and holy if you're able to do that.
Jamal,
Amen.
I'm seeing something from the chat that I do want to bring forward. Can you tell us a little about the Interfaith Amigos?
Oh, sure, yes. After 9/11 happened, Rabbi Ted Falcon invited me to his synagogue. He wanted to show a different side of Islam, and we became friends. And our families became friends, our congregation became friends, and we realized that's the key to overcome polarization. Have friendship. Then, no matter what the differences are, it no longer looms as a threat. And then when I and he were working, and we did a lot of interfaith work, we realized, we are cousins of the same Abrahamic family, but a very, very dysfunctional Abrahamic family. And our third cousin was missing. And Ted knew Don McKenzie. He's the pastor, used to be the senior pastor of University Congregational United Church of Christ, huge church. And so he became our third interfaith amigo. It just so happened that we began to like one another, and we began to realize, we all have problems, but the problem is that I point to problems in your holy book, but not in my holy book. So we began to write books. Like, for example, one of the books is called Religion Gone Astray. How come in our holy books we have exclusivity, so much exclusivity, violence, unequal status of women, homophobia, but not in your religion, in my religion. And so we became friends, we were writing books, and so we began to get a lot of invitations all over the country. So since my hair was black, we've been traveling the country and doing all kinds of programs in university, seminaries, churches who gather together with mosques and synagogues and temples. So yes, we have traveled a lot as the Interfaith Amigos. And now, because it's COVID, we have programs on Zoom. But we've written 3 books. We've probably done over 250 presentations all over the country. Japan, Israel, Canada, Bahamas, some other places also. So we've had great fun. But if you realize, the key is, if you want to overcome polarization, become friends. Have a human connection. This universe is made out of stories, not atoms. Just connect.
Thank you. When I lived in Bellingham for 4 years, one of the most wonderful things I got involved with was a group called Bridge Builders that was doing exactly that. It was faith leaders, Christians, Jews, and Muslims specifically, who just wanted to get together once a month and tell the stories of our faith and be friends. And I made some good friends. It was amazing.
So Brother Josh, we'll have to do this after the elections, no matter who wins or doesn't win, because unless we connect on a human level, it's going to be very difficult.
That's right. That's right.
There's a verse in
Thank
the
you.
Quran that says, God has created some of you to be a trial for others. It is so true.
Thank you, Jamal. This has been
you.
absolutely wonderful. I want, before I stop the recording, I want to say this has been a series organized by Darren Anderson, to whom I'm very grateful. Thank you, Darren. It's great to have you at Good Shepherd and on the Faith Formation Committee. I want to tease a couple of series coming up. Beginning this Sunday at 1:30, we will have a three-part series called the Christian Calendar and Home Traditions. We're going to look at the seasons of the Christian year and the ways that you can practice those seasons in your own home and in your own life. And then beginning next Wednesday, I will do a three-part series on Christian eschatology. The series will be called The Christian Hope, Falling Apart and Drawing Together. We're going to look at apocalyptic literature in the book of Daniel, in the Gospels, and in the book of Revelation, and unpack that especially through an Episcopal lens. So I do hope that you can join us for that. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, so thank you for all of you on Facebook who are watching. And for those of us who remain, you're welcome to join us for the service of Compline, which is very brief, for our bedtime prayers in the Christian Church. Thanks.